So here we will talk about the FHIR shorthand, abbreviated to FISH, because FHIR really likes its fun-sounding acronyms, and the test script authoring that we can do using that FHIR shorthand, and a implementation of such named Sushi. Because again, acronyms and puns. So FHIR shorthand is a domain-specific language for defining FHIR artifacts. And so currently the HL7 community is using FISH in the creation of FHIR implementation guides. It is a language meant to abstract a way to find details of representing FHIR in either JSON or XML. And the goal is to allow profile creators to more directly express their intent with fewer concerns about the underlying FHIR mechanics. It is, all things considered, a shorthand language. And while it was originally developed and is currently being supported to help these implementation guides to be written, there is some more use that we can get out of it. So for FISH beyond the implementation guide, it actually can be used to improve the test script authoring by providing these reusable definitional resources, and just like how it helps the implementation guides by abstracting away some of that, the JSON or XML specific text. And then in addition, based on how the FISH rule sets are defined, and I can give you some examples of those once we see it in action a little bit. Based on how they're defined, it can also drastically improve the readability of the test scripts by giving the rule sets very descriptive names. And then as an example of how it can compact down the actual file size of what you're looking at, this picture here is an example of how 40 lines of resource with including 60 lines of reusable definitional resources. So if you needed to make a copy of this, you would only need to copy 40 of those lines out of the 100 total. How that can be translated into 260 lines of JSON test script. And if you want to, I'll be opening this up as well, but if you want to see this in action, this link will actually take you out to the FISH School website, which is an online Sushi implementation that allows you to just mess with FHIR shorthand without actually downloading any of the required applications and such. And so if you want to see this yourself, you can go to this link and hit that convert to JSON button and see the JSON pop up as well. And this is a specific excerpt from that particular test script being translated. And so as we had mentioned in the test script authoring sections, there's a test element under test script, which can actually hold all of the different testing. And so for this particular test script, one of those test elements in FHIR shorthand can be defined with these 5 lines. We instantiate a new test, we give it some give it a title and give it a description. We add a operation where we say that it's a update create operation. It is hitting the patient resource, and it is a JSON operation. And then we have a couple extra specific lines where we say that same test action operation should have a params element that includes this variable create resource ID, and the source ID element should include this reference to this fixture resource create. And then after we've instantiated our operation there, we can just add a assert for the response code. We give it a 201 as the value, say it has to be equal to that value, and say that it does have to, I believe this is the stop test on fail, that it does have to, that will stop the test if this is not get matched correctly. Then we can give it a quick description. Then in JSON, this is the entire operation. So again, we have the ID and the name that came from that rule set variable. We have that full description that we pasted in there. It instantiates an action, instantiates an operation, gives it a type, has the entire code system for operation type, has that code, has the resource of patient, has to say accept and content type twice, like add that JSON twice, have all of this destination, origin, and code request URL that is probably going to be pretty static from operation to operation, but you still have to define those just in case they're a different value. And then you can finally give that params and source ID like we gave in separate lines in the shorthand. In addition to all of this lines of text, there's also all of this text for that assert that we added in just one line of the FHIR Shorthand version, where again, we can add the stop test on fail extension, give it that value of true that we passed in. We can set the description that we passed in. You have to manually set the response, have to manually set the operation of equals and the response code of 201, and you must set the warning only to false as well. So again, this is something, this is an example directly from that, if I go back a couple slides, directly from this example given in this FHIR School link. So you can go ahead and look at that yourself and see what changing any of these particular values changes on the output, if you're curious. And sushi, as I've been mentioning it, which does stand for Sushi Unshortened Shorthand Inputs. You can tell the developers had a lot of fun naming everything around FHIR Shorthand. But it is a reference implementation of an interpreter / compiler for the FHIR Shorthand language. And then just this is one of their bullet points that Sushi provides the HL7 fast healthcare interoperability resources, profiles, extensions, and other artifacts needed to create FHIR implementation guides. And then we have finally a couple extra pieces of useful information. So there is a link out to the FHIR IG for the shorthand definition. You can actually find that entire implementation guide and look it over. Well, the first link is the history, so you can see the different versions. The second link is specifically the reference page of it, which has some important information, and then the overview page of it, which also is very useful. As for the more, really call it third party, but the other tools in the sphere of Sushi and FHIR, there is that FHIR School website that I mentioned. It has it is a portal in itself and has a whole lot of documentation. I give a specific link here to the Sushi tutorial that they give on it. It tells how to actually download Sushi and implement it on your machine, and then how to run it and the different configurations that you can set up for different use cases and such. There's also a quick reference sheet, which is extremely useful when you are writing FHIR Shorthand, because it gives nice examples. It's two-sided. I actually have a physical copy of this reference sheet as well, but it's two-sided. On one side, it shows the definitional, essentially like here's how you would write something, and here's all the different places where the variables go, where you might want to change things. On the other side, it's the exact same copy, except instead of having variables, they have real examples. So they can say, like, yeah, when you are writing the a particular line, like this is an example from a patient resource or something like that, where those variables would actually fit in and the type of information that you want to use in those variables. And then, like I mentioned with my link earlier, there is an online sushi reference implementation at Fish School as well. And this is just a direct link to that if you want to start from scratch. And then we also just wanted to conclude with the community continues to learn about fish and where it's being leveraged and what it can be leveraged for. And AEGIS is very excited to be helping to take that conversation to the industry. So I have a Q&A here, but I do want to jump out to that example that I have at Fish Online. So again, we can see here, this is that excerpt that I pulled out, right? Just that one test. And then once these rule sets start getting defined, that is the end of the actual resource. So theoretically, all of this extra text down here can be put into a separate file and can be referenced by any of the files in your FHIR Shorthand repository. And this information is the actual readable test script definition. So if I go ahead and click that Convert to JSON button, you can see it takes a little bit, but it actually pulls out a JSON test script. And if you wanted to, given that you have your fixture references actually pointing to correct files, you can copy this out, save it as a JSON file itself, and upload that to Touchstone, and it will run. I tested it myself, but I don't have that before, but I don't have that set up right now. So I'm not sure I could show it on the fly. But you can see that this rule set information, which is, again, these definitional resources that you can pull in static values and pull and send in some variables. You can see there's an ID variable here that gets passed into the ID and name version or element in the test script. There's a title that gets used in title, and I think that's it. I don't think it gets reused anywhere. But title and description can get passed in, and then you can still have some fixed values, like defining that there is one origin and one destination. I have a copyright in here because all of the AEGIS developed test scripts usually have a AEGIS copyright on them. But if you don't need that, or if you would need to change it to something else for your own test scripts, you can just edit this here in the rule set and then reuse the metadata anytime that you would need to use it. There's also a separate rule set for defining fixtures where you only have to pass in an ID and resource. So instead of setting the ID to an ID, setting auto create and auto delete to false, and setting a resource all on 5 lines, if we go back to the actual test script, we can see all we do is insert the fixture, give it a name, give it a location, and then move on. And so that's one of the ways that the FHIR Shorthand can incredibly speed up and make it a lot more readable as to what is happening in these test scripts. So is there any questions, anything you guys are interested about with this and want me to play around with it? Because I could change some of these values, and you can see how it gets changed out into the JSON as well.
That's exactly what I was going to ask, Ryan. So if we have something that we want to make, I've lost my vocabulary. We want to make a rule set. So if we have something in a script that we want to make into a rule set to reuse again from Fish to JSON, can you convert it back to JSON and then use it moving forward in new Fish files?
I'm not sure I entirely followed what the question was.
All right, well, and it may not have been a well-informed question, so I apologize to the group. So if I have, so what I'm seeing on the right-hand side is the JSON test script, right? So if I had an assert in a test script that I wanted to use across all of my, a lot of test scripts, could I pop it in here and then hit the convert to Fish, and then I would have it available moving forward, and I could reference that rule set in new script.
So
and then do the convert.
I haven't been following the GoFish development as well, which is it's the implementation for converting JSON into FHIR Shorthand. I haven't been following that as well, but I don't think that it can take a subsection of a resource and pull it into a rule set. I'm not sure it does that, but that would be very interesting and cool if it could.
Okay.
But I don't know for sure. They might have already thought of that, and it's a cool feature. I can just hit this convert to fish button and see what happens. But I'm assuming it will instantiate all of these line by line, and then we'll see, without rule sets, how large the file actually becomes. Yeah. So you can see it's 125 lines. So without those rule sets, we did lose about 20 lines of compactness, but it's still much shorter than I believe it was 260 lines of JSON, obviously with the different spacings and such.
All right. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? Anybody on the line playing with this or working with a team and someone on their team that's playing around with this? I know we heard they're using it in IG writing. Is that correct? I'm sorry, Ryan. Did we touch on that, how it's being used? So any of the IG authors that folks on the call are working with, have they come across any of that? Nope. All right. I'm going to pause the recording if nobody has questions.
I have a question. I was just wondering, Ryan, have you started building out a library of scripts using this yet, or what is your thought on kind of the next step?
So I haven't been building out very much what's generic kind of pieces. If I refresh this so I can see the actual no, it's not gonna let me. So I haven't built too many generic pieces. These rules sets that I do have did come from my own work when I was investigating and figuring out how to build this. To be completely honest, most of the fruits of my labor have been pretty internal. There is some internal TestScript authoring that I do for different QA testing and making sure the validator is up to snuff. And most of that work that I do is now fixed in FHIR Shorthand, but I also do an incredible amount of repeating myself in that testing, as one might expect for a lot of QA testing. It's a lot of do the same thing but slightly different and expect a slightly different result.
Right.
But ideally, if I had a lot more time and could focus more on this, I would want to make some very explicit and descriptive rule sets where I can say, I can give somebody a list of these different rule sets and their inputs, and even someone who may have never seen FHIR Shorthand before, especially if it has like some mapping to, I think cucumbers is one of the big like well-readable test authoring things that people use. So maybe if there was some mapping from like cucumber into a shorthand like rule set database, you could hand that over to someone who may have absolutely no idea what FHIR does, may have no idea what shorthand does, but they could still write a test script. And I think that's incredibly strong. So I would love to spend some extra time and get all of that figured out. But especially if you're writing a whole bunch of test scripts for a specific use case, you're probably going to, do a lot of operations that instantiate themselves with one origin and one destination and use the same except in content type format and things like that, that you have a lot of repetition that you can compact down with shorthand.
Yeah, that's cool. I love I love connecting the dots to Cucumber. That's very clever.
Okay. Anybody else have anything?
Maybe if you start to pause the recording, someone else will speak up.
Maybe I should, yeah.